So what we see here is that the tribes on the eastern side of the Jordan were taken in 744. The tribes, or the rest of the tribes, as well as every bit of Judah, except for the city of Jerusalem, was taken in 721. Now, the Assyrians kept a very good number of how many they took. They actually took 200,196 of the tribe of Judah, leaving only about 50,000 inside the city. So you're looking at about 80% of the tribe of Judah were taken away up here. Right? So the amount of people who were actually descended from Judah who had returned after the Exodus, after them being taken away into Babylon, was very minimal by comparison to the amount that existed at that time. In 604, the rest of the city of Jerusalem was taken to Babylon. Next slide. So I'm just going to go through these slides fairly quickly because I don't want to be here all day, but I do want to get a sense for the migration as it occurred.
No, take your time, mate. That's good. It's going good.
You like this?
Yeah.
And it's, it's really interesting to see God's plan, and when we get to the back end, you'll really be blown away. Up here we read, the rising power of the Assyrian Empire, this is out of the encyclopedia as well, the rising power of the Assyrian Empire poses a threat to the surrounding nations, including the northern kingdom of Israel. The black obelisk of Shalmaneser in the British Museum dated 841 BC depicts Jehu, king of the northern kingdom of Israel, grovelling before Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, paying him tribute in an attempt to stave off invasion. It didn't work. He invaded anyway. Next slide. Here's that depiction here, where the Israelite king is there grovelling before the king of Assyria, pleading with him not to attack, not to invade, knowing that they would take... And Assyrians were one of the most ferocious invading forces in the history of mankind. They didn't like taking prisoners unless they could use them for slaves. So the fact that the Assyrians decided to take the Israelites and make them slaves was not the norm for the Assyrians. They usually killed everybody. Next slide. The tribes on the eastern side in 744, the eastern side of the Jordan River are taken captive. So they're taken back up to here, and it actually records where they were. Habor and Hara, and the river goes down until this day. What we're talking about here is down this area here, on the coast of the Caspian. That's where they went to. And they stayed there for some time and populated. This area here is called the Caucasus Mountains. That's where history picks up the Caucasian people from. Right? Just below that in the plains is where around about 3.5 million Israelites were kept on the banks of the Caspian. So it gives you an idea of where the history books pick them up. But the history books will tell us that the Caucasians just appeared out of nowhere. They don't know where they came from. They were just there. Because it's not popular to say that God had a nation and had a plan. It's not politically correct. That's the geopolitical filter. That's where the history starts to be a bit skewed. Next slide. The rest of the northern kingdom were taken away up into here and here. So there was some stored over here as well. Next slide. The first historic record of the Gemiri appeared in the Assyrian annals in the same region where the tribe of Israel had been deported and lost a year of history. This word Gemiri, what does that mean? Because here, in 714, we start to have a record of this Gemiri in this area and this area. So, all of a sudden there's been a name change. Ooh. It's not really a name change. Gemiri is actually the Assyrian name. We'll see that after. Next slide.
Gemiri is the Assyrian name for
Israel.
Israel.
Yep. The Assyrian king Sennacherib storms the fortified cities of the southern kingdom of Judah and takes over 200,000 of the tribe of Judah captive, however fails to capture Jerusalem. Now you read about this, what happened was when he came down and took the 46 cities of major cities of Judah and took them back up into Assyria, they were just about to come and take the city of Jerusalem when all of these troops got dysentery and they had to turn around and go home. So God protected the city of Jerusalem. Next slide. That story is all told on the thing called Sennacherib's hexagonal prism. These are primary sources. So for years people would talk about this and historians would go, well, where's your primary sources? It's in the museum. All they have to do is read it. It's Scholars confirm that the people known to the Persians as the Saka, to the Babylonians, as the Gemiri, and to the Assyrians as Qumran, were but different names for the lost 10 tribes in captivity. So you have 3 titles here talking about the one people, but 3 different languages. So as they moved through the nations, they were given these names. They were called these different names by different people. Do we see that? So history records these people as being people who moved across, but they're not called Israel anymore. Remember, one of the promises was that they would lose their identity, they would lose their name. They'd have a name change. Exactly what happened. Saka, or Sake, meant the house of Isaac, while the terms Gumri and Gemiri translate as the house of Omri. The Assyrians later also adopted the Babylonian variant Qumri or Gemiri. From this word Qumran or Gemiri developed the tribal name Sumerian. These were some of the first settlers of England. And it's also interesting as well, if you do a bit of a look on the internet to look at linguists and language professors, what they'll tell you is that the first language spoken in Ireland was Hebrew. And that the alphabet that we use has a Semitic origin, or Israelite origin. Next slide. Well, this is again, you can see this how they moved across here and they moved into this area here. Eventually they took these Israelites eventually came down here and took Lydia under the name of Gemiri. Next slide. The Sumerians attacked the kingdom of Lydia, killing the Lydian king Gyges, and caused great destruction for the Lydian capital Sardis.
Yeah, why did they do that, mate?
Because at this stage, by 654, what had happened was the Assyrian Empire had been greatly weakened because the Babylonian Empire is rising to power, so they lost their grip on the people that were dwelling over here and the people that were here, so that they no longer had the same sort of yoke of bondage on them. Because the Assyrian Empire was being so weakened because they were continually sending off their forces to go and battle the Babylonians. In the sacking of Babylon, they found arrows that were Israelite arrows, where these people had allied themselves with the Assyrians against the Babylonians. Because we're talking about hundreds of years. So there's some degree of assimilation and they joined forces. In the Assyrian annals, it talks about them as being mercenaries. Next slide. Now as we read here, some Sumerians moved west into Europe along the Danube and became known as Celts. Others moved towards the Baltic and were known as the Cimbri. You see the name variations as they move through? It's also interesting as well that these people came across here and the Celts came over here, and there's this big massive battle in north-western Germany where these Saxons met with the Celts to go and battle. When they went out, they realised they spoke the same language when they sent their emissaries out, and they realised that they were actually together. So when they eventually came in together, they actually allied themselves when they came in. So when Britain was eventually invaded by Saxons and Celts, they were like brothers. They worked together.
How did we get from Cimbri to Saxons? How did they become the name change there?
The name Saxons was a name that developed as they moved across here. They were originally called Scythians, and then they called them Isaac's sons or Saxons. Because these people held really, especially the Saxons, held true to their heritage and their heraldry. So they were aware of who they were. So the Saxons had actually moved. When Babylon rose to power and pushed northward, these ones that were here fled through this way. The ones that were up here fled through the Caucasus.
Yeah.
Some of them went across here into the Punjab region of India. Buddha's family arrived in the Punjab region around 580 BC. And they were from a tribe called the Sake.
Well, let's stick with the Saxons anyway,
yeah. When the Saxons arrived in England, they were a real powerful force too.
That's
they
right.
actually came in and they were ruling it for 200 years as soon as they got there.
The Saxons were probably the most powerful of all of the people who came in. Probably with the exception of the Picts, because the Picts came in from the north, and as they moved down, they were like the Vikings, and they were very, very strong. And they were very much into the shipping as well. Next slide. 586, King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, destroyed Jerusalem and takes all but a few inhabitants captive into Babylon. So all the while this is happening, in the interim from 744 BC until 586 BC, there has been a gradual weakening of Assyria and a gradual strengthening of these two regions of these people who are of Israelite descent. Can you see that? And as Babylon eventually pushed up and took Nineveh, which was the capital of Assyria, then people just fled and moved through here. In the Apocryphal books, it talks about Israel coming and settling from here around to a place called Asareth. Next slide. The Gamiri appears on the Behistine rock inscription as the Babylonian equivalent to the Persian Saka. This is where we get the word Saxon from. Also known as Scythians, who were forming an empire around the shores of the Black Sea and southern Russia. A lot of the White Russians, when they talk about White Russians, what they're talking about is people in this area here, southern Russia. That's distinct from the Slavic Russian people. Next slide. Here's a picture of the... This is massive, by the way, this stone over in northern Iran. Next slide. In the Apocrypha it says, those are the 10 tribes which were carried away prisoners out of their land in the time of Hosea, the king, whom Shalmaneser, the king of Assyria, led away captive, and he carried them over the waters, so they came into another land, and in the same region is called Asareth. So you can see the migration as it's occurred so far, where they settled here, safe from the Babylonians, where the Babylonian Empire stretched only from this region here. You see that? So all they did in the first instance was they moved across to the other side of the Black Sea and settled there, around these rivers. These rivers, by the way, are the Danube, the Dnepr, the Dniester, the Don, all named after Dan, one of the tribes of Israel. And eventually they made their way up here to Dan's Mark, or Denmark. Next slide. As well as Danes came into England as well. So this is around about 600 to 100 BC. Celts arrived in Brisbane, not in Brisbane, yeah. In Britain, mainly from France, and between 200 and 100 BC, the Scythians of southern Russia are driven westward by marauding Sarmatian nomads from the east. It's interesting that these people here, the Scythians who came into here, when they came in here, these Scythians settled in Germany, and when the Romans eventually got up there, they recognised that these people were the same people as these people over here, and they called them genuines, or Germans. The Latin word for genuine is Germanian. So that's where these names come from. That's why it's important to look into the language and look into the heraldry as well as the folkloric history in order to develop and paint the picture. Because we're talking about thousands of years. Next slide. Now, looking in Scripture, we read in 700 BC, God said, "Listen, O isles, unto me, and hearken, you people from afar." Now, that's written in 700 BC, 40-odd years after Israel had been taken away, captivity. They hadn't yet arrived in the isles. And he's talking about Israel as a nation still, 40 years after they're long gone. In 2 Samuel 7, 1000 BC, God said to David, when David was at the height of his kingdom, he said, "Moreover, I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and I'll plant them, and that they may dwell in a place of their own, and move no more, neither shall the children of wickedness afflict them any more as formerly." So you can see there that when Israel were down here in Palestine, God said to them when they were at the height of their power that he's going to paint them in a new place, a new nation. Remember one of the promises was that they would live in an island home northwest of Palestine? If you go northwest of Palestine, you go straight through London. It's no accident or coincidence. Next slide. This is essentially what occurred over the period of about 1500 years. You had Exodus is coming in through here. This group over here were called the Tuatha De Danann. They came into Ireland, bringing with them Judahites who were descended from Judah himself. Judah had 5 children. 2 of them died, 3 of them lived. One of them was Pharez, one was Zara, and one was named Sheila. We read in the Old Testament that half of the tribe of Sheila went with Zara, Judah, and took off on boats and went to live in a new place. And where they landed was over this area here. And you would have read the story in the Old Testament about Tsar of Judah, how Tsar of Judah had a scarlet cord around his wrist. Well, these people who turned up over here in Ireland, around about 1100 BC, turned up there and their emblem was the scarlet cord around the wrist.